The United Kingdom is haunted. This world is a strange one. For the longest time, I've wanted to travel to London for my vacation. It seems like such a great idea as there's no language barrier, yet the culture would still be so different and fun. But as you're about to find out, England and the entirety of the United Kingdom, from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, can be terrifying. Imagine great expanses of forests and old Georgian and Gothic buildings all in an often gray, dreary climate. There are werewolves on the moors, haunted castles and mansions, and of course, wherever there are people, there are always dangerous strangers. So, these are some allegedly true United Kingdom horror stories. Enjoy. But first, a huge thanks goes out to Joe W. for donating. Thank you. Also, I had a great idea. Are any of you familiar with Costco? I'd love to hear your creepy experiences there. Oh yes, Costco scary stories. I can feel the cringe and creepiness already. Now, if you've got bugger all to do today, let's get into these stories. Number 1. Welsh Woods Monster. Submitted by Nathan. I live in South Wales, in a little village just outside of Cardiff. I don't want to name the place specifically, but there is a very popular singer from this particular town. Also, anybody who knows Wales will know that the outside cities can be quite rural and a mixture of fields, forests, and mountains that quickly will merge into old mining villages. One day, I was on my way home from an 11-hour shift. As this happened in winter, it had been dark for hours, despite only being 8 o'clock in the evening. I had decided to take a detour, as my regular route was blocked due to an accident, and it was the worst decision I've ever made. I decided to go over the mountain that leads to my local village. The road goes up a steep incline that cuts in on itself, and it continues to go up and up. There are no streetlights, but there are road markings that keep you on track. After about 10 minutes, I make it to the top of this mountain. There is nothing notably strange at this point, until I start to drive the slow incline down towards the deep forest. I'm about 30 seconds into the drive down when I realize there are no other sounds other than the rattling of my engine and the radio. It was strange. Even though I couldn't hear anything outside of the car, it felt like I was being told that something isn't right. I don't know why, but I stopped the car in order to listen to the sounds that should be there. The trees were dark and still, and I could barely see past the tree line either side of me. In front of me, my car headlights brightened up the road ahead. I turned off my engine as I found it difficult to concentrate on the sounds outside of the car with the engine running. And then it was silent. There wasn't a sound, no crickets, noises, or birds flapping their wings. There was not even the sound of the wind blowing. It was like all sound in that moment was non-existent, and it filled me with dread. And then I heard it.
Help!
Someone cried through the darkness of the forest.
Help me!
But this voice was distorted, like if someone played it on a record player. It sounded crackly but faded out towards the end of every cry for help. It was so wrong. I jumped out of the car and I tried to focus on what I could see past the trees. My heart was racing. I started to sweat, and I was breathing so heavily I felt my heart was coming up through my mouth, and I was frozen with blind fear. And then I saw it. It was a man, or so I thought. They were disproportionate, with long, skinny legs and arms, and I saw bright red eyes appear and disappear as if it was blinking and looking straight at me. It seemed to walk or glide towards me with his arms swinging back and forth. I don't know because my head was fuzzy at the time. I felt confused and afraid. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. As it got closer, I could see its face, and this thing was the furthest from human. It had little notable facial features. This creature stopped, and it opened its mouth wide and wider than anything I'd ever seen before, and it let out the most terrifying scream I'd ever heard. It was so loud that it felt like it dug into my very existence and shook me to the core. That was the moment I shook my head and I realized what was going on. Instantly, I jumped into the car and tried to start the engine. My hand was shaking so much, I could barely turn the key. After what seemed like a lifetime, I managed to put the car into first gear, and I drove off. I drive down the road and check my mirror, and that thing is standing in the road, not moving, not making a sound, just standing there. When I got home, I locked all the doors and I cried for hours until I finally fell asleep. Eventually, someone introduced me to scary horror stories, and I ended up doing my own research. I stumbled upon tales about skinwalkers, and that's what I believe I saw. Whales or not, it could have only been that. I've had nightmares ever since, and I've always thought that one day I will see that thing again. Needless to say, I have not gone near that area ever since. Number 2. My Encounters. Submitted by Sam. I have a small collection of stories of what has happened to me throughout my life. I'm from England in the UK, and both my mother and father's side of the family have had encounters with spirits as well as demons. I live near Cannock Chase, which is famous for the black-eyed children. However, I have never encountered such things. I have small, minor experiences in that place, which has often kept me up at night. The first thing I can remember is the heavy sense of being watched while walking through the wooded area of the chase, mostly when I had walks with my friend, who we'll call Sarah for privacy reasons. Now, I've had this feeling constantly whenever I go for walks in the chase, but there was one occasion where we were up in the moor, when Sarah had stopped walking and she began to face the opposite direction of me. I turned back to her. She was staring off at the hilly, wooded area of the chase from where we had come from. I was confused at first, wondering what the heck she was doing, but when I walked over and asked what was up, she pointed out a clearing on one of the hills, trying to focus on what was in it. I began to look in the direction she was, and I noticed the whole of the clearing had a somewhat fuzzy black blob in the middle of it. When I began to focus more at it, I started to notice that it didn't quite fit the surroundings that it was in. Now, I would have just crossed it off as deer resting together, as this was around August time last year, and deer are very common in Cannock Chase, but something about this weird mass scared me. It didn't fit. It was like if you copied a picture of someone onto a slightly low-quality photo on Photoshop without bothering to edit it in. I don't know what that strange entity was, and I still don't to this day, but I know for sure that it wasn't something I'd like to see ever again. Later that day, when Sarah and I got to the information center a few miles from where we saw the mass, I tried to talk to her about it. She must have felt the same way, because she simply said she did not want to think or talk about it, and we changed the topic. I've had a few other things happen to me personally in various locations. In my old house when I was about 8, I couldn't sleep one night with the horrible feeling of being watched. Now, this memory is slightly fuzzy for me as I've tried to block it out of my mind countless times, but I can always just remember being on the top bunk of my bed, and there was a shadowy figure staring right at me. It was just standing there at the ladder to the bunk bed, only inches away. Nothing really happened that night, especially not sleep. Now, I know this sounds a lot like sleep paralysis, and I do believe it was that myself, but there's just something more about this memory that creeps me out to this day. I was never asleep to begin with, and it felt like a being was stopping me from sleeping at all. Nothing like that has ever happened to me since, as about a year later my grandma died and we moved into her old house, which is where my parents currently live, and I'm staying there for the winter break before I head back to my house for university. The last thing I want to talk about is the small things I've heard and seen in the house my parents currently live in. Of course, there's never been anything bad, but they are completely paranormal. It's all just little things like hearing random noises at night. My dog blankly staring at random places of my room or the living room when me or my parents can't hear anything else. Then there was one time when I had a day off from school. I woke up earlier than usual, and I began to hear things. At first it was just knocking, some from my neighbor who was at the time doing works on his house and our houses are joined together. But then I heard someone running across the landing, which caused me to freak out. Nobody was home at the time, and my dog was in my room, so it couldn't have been him. I laughed it off and opened my door. Of course, no one was there, which sent chills down my spine, so I quickly turned on the landing light and went back to my room to go back to bed. My mother also had an experience here which really scares me. She didn't want to tell me at first, in case it did scare me, but I managed to get her to talk. She said one night she randomly woke up facing the wall away from my father to see the face of a young boy. Just the face, grinning at her before vanishing. She jumped up immediately and woke my father up, telling him about it before trying to go back to bed. Cannock Chase is a well-known paranormal hotspot in the UK. And honestly, I just hope nothing worse happens to me in the future, but I am grateful that my own encounters have been small. Number 3. The Wrong Crowd. Submitted by Ross M. I seem to get premonitions, largely through dreams. As a child, I remember dreaming on 2 separate occasions of exact events which unfolded today. One recurring dream I've had, for example, is of walking around a house I know to be my aunt and uncle's house in the Midlands. Only it's not as I remember it. There were rooms I didn't recognize, as well as an extra section to the house that I didn't remember. This house is deep in the countryside, and an extremely old one at that, the oldest I know of. It's very large and a place I've considered my home for years now. I used to love exploring, building dens, and playing with animals, of which there were chickens, ducks, horses, and cats. It's not unusual in the winter for the house to be so cold that glasses by the bed would be frozen by morning. This is because my aunt and uncle, kind as they are, saved money on heating and instead contributed portions of their money every month for my brother and I to go to university when we can. So after being bugged by this recurring dream once again, I consulted my uncle. His name is Jesse Bruton. Look him up. He took me to his studio where he showed me pictures of the house as it used to be. I learned that it was once a school, a hotel, and a large estate house in the Georgian era. When I saw the diagrams and paintings of the house as part of the estate, I instantly recognized the tall pillars and staircases from my dream, and I began to recognize other parts too. The whitewashed stone windows, the slate floor I had felt so cold beneath my feet. Although that isn't scary in and of itself, I admit I found myself thinking back to time spent here alone as a younger child. I remember once I had visited to help repair the roof when I was around 12 or 13, and I spent the evening reading my uncle's poetry books by their open fire. One evening, we had to unhinge the door in order to repair part of the roof. In order to do this, I had to unscrew the doorbell they had, and I left the parts of it on the coffee table. Later that evening, the doorbell kept ringing and buzzing in front of me, and after the second or third time it was annoying, so I removed the batteries from the device and I went to bed. I recall at about 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up to a chiming sound from beneath me in the room below. At this point, I was a little distressed, and I turned on the lamp next to me, which was a big mistake. I was sleeping in one of my uncle's old art studios, which still had lots of his old bits, in low light, and I'm sure you can imagine a guillotine, black and white photos, a sheep's skull and scalpels, etc. At freezing temperatures were pretty freaking creepy. Before I knew it, I noticed the telephone ringing. Now, as I've mentioned, the house was old, very old, and the telephone was no exception. It was mounted on the wall where the bells for servants used to be. The telephone was an old corded landline with one of those disc dials. Moments after the telephone rang, I could hear my younger brother getting out of bed in the living room where he was sleeping. I heard him walk over to the phone and answer, as you do at 3 in the morning. I started to get up to check out who was on the phone, but by the time I had my slippers on, I could hear him putting the phone back on the holder with the familiar ding. As I opened the door, my brother Robert jumped, looking visibly shaken when I asked him, "Who was on the phone at this hour?" Whilst rubbing my eyes. He told me in an uncharacteristically timid voice that someone had told him in a deep and crackly voice to stop. over and over again. Instantly, I called bullcrap and laughed. Teasing him was my first response, saying, "You're a total wuss, probably just a crackly line or something." After I had stopped giggling, I started to pick up on my brother's vibes. It was seriously odd. Robert, who has never failed to make a joke out of anything and seems only braver in the face of danger, was now clearly quite shaken up. Just the fact that he wasn't going, "Hey, gotcha," was enough for me to start to question what the heck was going on. Now I know this sounds weird, really weird, but I did get that horrible feeling all over my skin in areas I couldn't quite see, my back, my neck, and all up inside of my thighs. We tried to calm down with a game of Yu-Gi-Oh, and after that, Rob and I went back to bed, and we walked around that house a little more cautiously than we ever did. Now, I'd describe it as paranoia, but back then it was very, very real. I could feel this intense hatred radiating from my surroundings, which made me too scared to even open my eyes as I passed a mirror, afraid of anything I might see. What felt like hours later, back in bed, I was back into a slightly restless sleep. My next memory was my brother swinging open my bedroom door with tears rolling down his cheeks, and he was shouting. Not words, just shouting, but that said enough. He didn't need to make sense for me to know that this is what fear looks like when your body is filled to the brim with it, and it overflows into your speech. You know what horrible lump in your throat you get in a horror film when you know a really chilling moment is coming? It must have been something like that, but far worse. I was getting it too, just watching him. I calmed my brother down. Now fully awake, I asked him, What happened, Rob?" Robert began to explain to me how he was woke up in the middle of the night by a banging on his window. Not a knock, no. The whole window was shaking and pulsating. I immediately assumed it was Jesse, my uncle, back from their trip with our parents early. We had been tasked with caring for the animals in the house while they were gone overnight. Really, all we had to do was feed the pets in the morning for money. Not bad. So I asked Robert, "Are you sure it wasn't just Jess messing with you?" After all, it would have been characteristic of him, who was always playing practical jokes on us when we were younger. And all Robert could do was shake his head violently. Just as my brother had stopped shaking his head and had looked back up at me, I felt the floor beneath me shake, and then a massive crash, or rather a loud thud, filled the house. I freaked out, realizing, of course, that this was definitely not my uncle. With this realization came the last time I cried in my memory. The lump in my throat seemed to grow until it forced out of my eyes in the form of droplets. I hid my eyes from my brother and I shut the door. I put a chair in front of it and I scuttled back anxiously to join him on the sofa bed. Now you may have guessed this, but my family are not the huggy sort. You deal with your problems with alcohol as an adult, or you internalize them as a child. But the last thing you do is hug. But my brother and I were holding one another. We buried our faces under the covers. We were shaking, all as the room shook again and again around us. Naturally, we did not sleep a wink that night, but after it subsided, I remember being too afraid to just put my head above the covers for fear of who or what I might see in my room. Anyway, that's about it. After that night, my uncle and my father restored the door to how it used to be, and nothing else happened save for a few lights turning on and off. Despite my skepticism with the paranormal, I am still very petrified even thinking about this to this day. I still can't explain this, and I don't like thinking about it at all. Of all the things that have happened to me, this has scared me more than anything else in my life. It was fear like I've never known. Number 4. The White Van. Submitted by Sam G. Now, before I start, I'll give you some details as to where I live. I live in a cul-de-sac, which is in the shape of a circle. The middle of this circle had grass which my friends and I would play on when we were younger. Coming in, my house would be at the bottom left corner of it, and my two friends, who we'll call Jess and Noah, lived on the opposite side of this circle. During a long and hot summer, there had been kidnapping attempts around the area, but as young and naive we were, we brushed it off as we lived in such a close neighborhood. There were houses all around, so if anything happened, we assumed that someone would see. We felt safe in our own little world until what happened that day. The three of us were out playing football on the circle. We played happily for about an hour, and then we noticed a white van come into the cul-de-sac. Now, we didn't think much of this as someone who lives there owned a white van. So we simply carried on playing as the van went around the circle, albeit very slowly. Once the van went around once, we thought they must have gone the wrong way or something, and they were leaving. But we were very wrong. Instead of exiting the cul-de-sac, the van went around again and again. By the fourth circle, we started to get a bit worried, as our parents had told us about the attempted abductions earlier before. We all decided to start walking to my friend's house as my parents were at work. Jess's mom was at home, so that was our best bet. As we got off of the grass and we were walking over the road, the van sped up to get to our side. The moment we saw it coming, we all ran for the house. As we got to the gate, I turned around to look, and I saw the van had stopped close to us, and a man and woman were getting out. The woman was very obviously holding something behind her back, but I couldn't see what as we were trying to run. We got to the house and slammed the door just in time as the couple were at the front gate. I told Jess to go get her mom, who was inconveniently in the shower at the time. After Jess went to get her, I looked at the front door, which had a glass panel. The glass had a pattern on it, so you could only see the outline of a person if someone was at the door, and this is exactly what I saw. I saw a figure bend down and open the letterbox, and all I could see was a pair of brown eyes. I was frozen as we forgot to lock the door. I mean, we were kids in a hurry and very panicked. We weren't thinking too straight. The next thing I heard was a man's voice saying, "Is your mommy and daddy home?" I couldn't reply as I was still in shock. I looked at Noah and I said to call 999. Noah ran to get the house phone. We were all too young to have mobile phones. I heard the letterbox slam, so I ran to the living room to check out the window, and I saw the people running full speed towards their van. Then Jess's mom came down in a dressing gown, asking what was going on. I burst into tears, telling her that the white van man was going to get us. By the time she went to look outside, all she could see was the back end of that van leaving the circle. The three of us were peeking out the front door to see what was going on, and as I looked towards the front gate, I saw a length of rope and some duct tape, which they must have dropped when they were running to the van. After this, Jess's mom called the police, and they came over within the hour. They took the rope and duct tape, and took our statements from the three of us. After this incident, we never heard of that white van again, and I don't think they ever caught anyone either. They simply vanished. I still live in the same house now, and I'm still close friends with Jess and Noah. And we were all scared by this experience for life and wish to never go through it again. Number 5. My Cousin Tommy. Submitted by Necrotic. So, for many years now, I've always wondered about the truth. What is real and what isn't? These questions greatly stem from what I'm about to share with you. When I was a young lad, about 4 or 5, I had strong memories of a boy. His name was Tommy. I remember him as my cousin. We would chill in bed together and watch cartoons. Tom and Jerry was our favorite. It took place in the room I'm typing to you from now. Let me preface this by saying I do not know the truth of this, whether it be a ghost, imagination, or something altogether more sinister. One time I was with Tommy at his house on his couch while my mother was with his mother in his room. I said my memories are vivid, but it's more like looking at a few photographs. Tommy has brown, short hair, a pudgy face, and he was a sweet boy. I'm now 24 and I've asked my parents about this several times because I'm not sure I'm getting a straight or truthful answer. But from what I've been told, I do not have a cousin named Tommy. I get chills down my spine remembering this. In fact, I get goosebumps everywhere. There never was a Tommy. I don't know what Tommy is or was, or if he's real, if he's a ghost or something more sinister. Perhaps my house was haunted. I don't like to linger on the past, especially when it comes to Tommy. But maybe someone will know something about this entity. And number 6. The Woman in the Wardrobe. Submitted by Cameron. This happened to me when I was about 3 years old. I'm now a 43-year-old dad of 2, and thinking about this, it still scares the hell out of me. When I was young, I used to like to bounce on my parents' bed. They had an orthopedic mattress, so one day after visiting the toilet, I'd gone into their bedroom and proceeded to play on the bed, bouncing for all I was worth. When suddenly, a woman, and I use that term loosely, came out of my parents' wardrobe and made a god-awful sound like a loud choking. I said it looked like a woman, but the thing was bald and for all the world looked like a shop mannequin. Even still, she had red lipstick with blue eyeshadow and a red dress with yellow flowers on it. I ran screaming from the bedroom to my mom, who was downstairs. After she calmed me down, I told her what had happened and that the lady was trying to get me. My mom took me upstairs so I could show her what I'd seen, but I told her that the lady would get her too. Thankfully, it didn't, and she's fine, despite my screaming and panicking. The bedroom was as empty as when I first entered it, and from that day on, my trips to the toilet were a lot shorter, and they didn't involve any bouncing on my parents' bed before or after. Even now, 40 years later, I can still see her in my mind's eye, and I've never seen it since, and I don't want to either. I did dream about it a while back. Although I didn't see it in my dream, I knew she was there. I've had a few other spooky experiences, but nothing, and I mean nothing, will ever come as close to making me feel this scared as she did that sunny day. You know, even after hearing these stories, it only makes me want to go on an overseas vacation even more. I find beauty in horror. I find that creepy being watched feeling you get when you're alone in the woods to be inspiring. It makes me want to write a story, read true horror tales, and maybe even encounter something of my own, even if it kills me. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget, send me your Costco horror story soon at darknessprevails.org. Thanks.